A lot of this conversation we're having right now is only so that we clear cut pathways for young people right now to get to places that they're not getting already, like get to jobs they're not having, and to stop having this conversation around why can't we find any diversity in such and such a pipeline? That feels like the silliest question to be asking for 50 years. Figure it out. It isn't exactly rocket science. Pay me some money. I'll go find people for you, you know.
I'll give you one of my hot takes because it actually came to exist because of the AI talent conversation. You know, everyone is talking about how do we find the machine learning engineers of today? How do we find those who can write the data sets such that they are inclusive and equitable? And to answer a talent problem of today, you would have had to design the solution 20 years ago when they were in elementary school, because there are certain choices that have to happen in elementary school to make them eligible for certain middle schools. You have to make certain choices in middle school to have access to certain high schools and certain experiences in high school. So there's this kind of retrospective. Any talent problem is an education problem of yesterday.
Wow. Wow. That's not just a hot take. That's also depressing a little bit. I
But
mean,
it's not
wow.
depressing if
Yeah.
we're having conversations about what skills do we support and emphasize today? How do we create access today in young people?
We had a chance to sit down with Erinn Corbett Wright, the Senior Manager of Philanthropy at Salesforce. She leads a $5 million grant-making initiative that empowers Black and Latino youth. She has extensive experience in social impact, specializing in nonprofit management, corporate social responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, private philanthropy, and impact assessment. She was kind enough to sit down with us to discuss some of the emerging opportunities in AI, specifically for our communities. Erinn, welcome. We appreciate you being here this morning.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing very well. And one of the reasons I'm excited to see you is because you can answer one question that I always have, which is around demystifying for our young people how people get to where they are. Like, how did you get to this role that you are? Because I feel like some of us have jobs that aren't very easy to explain all the time. And people wonder, how'd you get there? Like, how'd you get that work? So I want to start there with you. As a person who is a industry leader, you're at Salesforce, which is like one of the world's biggest companies in tech, and we're always talking about getting more of our young people into number one into executive roles, into these companies, but also into tech. So when we start with your own kind of pathway, how does one become you, Erinn? How do we get to where you are?
Ooh, okay. So I will definitely say that a lot of my story is actually the result of good timing, opportunity, and access. So my origin story is actually pretty humdrum. So I'm from Philadelphia. I have lived in the city my entire life. Every time I thought I would have to leave for whatever reason, I didn't have to. And so grew up, parents are from West Philly, had me super young. So mom and dad were 19 years old. Um, Dad was incarcerated for a while, and I was in the fourth grade one day, got into this college access program. It was called Stepping Stone College Program. It's now called Heights Philadelphia. And that experience showed me that I wasn't so different from my peers. I just had an opportunity this one time that was really cool. And so like that's like a recurring theme in my life, is not that I've been so special, but just like I've so happened to get this one chance this one time. And so I've loved being in philanthropy and being in grant making and helping to move dollars to nonprofit organizations for forever. I got my start working for a state representative in Philadelphia. His name is Jordan Harris. And from there, I got into nonprofit fundraising. Um, and really and truly, each pivot, because I've had a lot, so I've done a lot of things really fast. So it's been a lot of trial and error, even though it's all looked very linear. But one of the questions that has always motivated me has been, how do I remain at the intersection of taking care of myself and helping others? And so at one point in time, that meant policy to me, and that's when I worked as a legislative assistant. Then I felt as though impact meant helping to raise money for organizations and programs that were doing meaningful work. And then I got exposed to grant making and philanthropy, and I felt as though there was a lot of power in being able to support decision making around who has access to resources. And I became very interested in how those conversations evolve and how you can influence them for good. Particularly because people who are usually making those decisions are not people who have ever been the beneficiary of nonprofit programming, but I have been. I've been in an impact report probably
Mhm.
more times than I so as a reader of impact reports today, I try very much to keep in mind that there's a me, right? Each number of young persons served, of, those placed in jobs, of percentage of knowledge gained is me. And so it's not just the numbers. And so it helps me to keep a very humble and human centered experience of philanthropy, because it is very easy to only think in terms of numbers and outputs. Um,
Metrics.
but exactly.
Mhm.
But we're talking about humans at the end of the
Mhm.
day. We are
Mhm.
humans helping humans do what they want to do
Mhm.
on their own terms. And so this was a very long journey, a very long walk to say that it's just always been exploring the question because of the experiences that I had with the nonprofit sector. How do I work within it to create more opportunity for other people who are just like me? Um, and so that's the question.
You said so many things there that I want to follow up on. Like they're like all compounding in my head right now. The first one is, so there was that program that you had in fourth grade, right? That helped
Mhm,
you see something, and then you had one time in your life where you worked in nonprofit, and then you had another time when you worked in philanthropy, and that to
mhm,
me feels like a continuous like thing, like the person being helped and impacted all the way to the person who's actually making the money happen to fund those things happening. Um, it's interesting that you have been in all three of those places. I would love to know what you think about like what's the disconnect. I've been in nonprofit for a big part of my life. I was in philanthropy for a very short amount of time, but like you, I also had been the recipient of the
mhm,
nonprofit industrial complex,
mhm,
which I've been a
mhm.
part of now for almost two
Oh my
decades, or more than two
goodness.
decades. You know, yeah,
The
for more than
revolution will
yeah.
not be televised. I love it.
Uh, so so help me understand what your take on the disconnect. I don't know if there is a disconnect, but the way that those three things interact, the affected and impacted people, then the folks that are being paid and writing grant reports about how they helped us,
Mhm.
and then the people who are, every year putting out a brochure saying we funded the people who are doing this great work, and we're on the brochure, but nothing's 100% changing for us in our communities. We're still as needy as ever.
So I do think that this is an inherent tension, and this is where the intersection of all of my past professional lives come to play. So, the nonprofit sector exists by and large as a function of the failures of government. or at least what we have said that our democracy is set to. And as the sector has grown, you've actually seen a waning in what we receive in our democratic promise. Let's put it that way. And so, and so, in the fraying of government supports, what you now have is people who have the privilege and the benefit of a lived experience where they do not have proximity to these services. And therefore, there are just certain blinders that prevent them from accessing a level of reality that says that certain resources or social supports or structural supports are needed. And those are the same people who have resources that are incentivized to flow back to the communities who are struggling and in need of those supports. Right. And so while I am incentivized to participate in this structure, I'm not necessarily rewarded for solving the problem. I am also not rewarded for I'm rewarded for spending the money. I'm not rewarded for being a good human to other humans, right? Because there's a tax structure that says that you reduce your liability, but like we don't have any financial incentives for being a good human or for the quality of the philanthropy. And so where the nonprofit professional comes in is sitting as the air traffic controller between the two, in my opinion. And so the person who does not understand, I have to summarize this foreign experience in enough similar terms that you have some idea of it and you're willing to invest in the unknown. Because otherwise, why would you need impact reporting if it were a sure shot? At the same time, I have to then say, how do I translate this projection around what someone should do in order to overcome their circumstance from people who have not lived that circumstance? I, as the practitioner, now have to develop a program that is responsive, but also incorporates what a funder says or what we mutually agree are the supports necessary to evolve. And so there's this in each language translation, there's a little bit that's lost each time. And those are the cracks, those are the faults among those three audiences, even though they are all interdependent on each other. Because for as much as those who make funding decisions may be accused of turning their nose up at program participants and beneficiaries, we can't fund something that has zero participants, or we won't fund that. We wouldn't say
Yeah.
that that's good stewardship.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is that the public and most people don't know. It's a mystery how all these things work together.
Mhm.
And if you haven't been in funding meetings, if you haven't had to write grant reports, if you haven't had to contort yourself into an application for a funder to stay alive and to keep your staff fed who are directly
Mhm.
working with human beings every day, you if you haven't done that, then I encourage you to like ask somebody who has because it's an interesting story as someone who has lived it.
Oh,
Um,
Chris, I
you
tell
know,
everyone that the best grant makers are those who have worked as program managers or like program staff or
yes,
fundraisers themselves. It gives you
yes.
the lived experience. It's like an apprenticeship model, right? Like now
Mhm,
my workforce development hat is on. You do need the lived experience
mhm.
of the other side to understand how to navigate and develop good partnerships.
Well, I think that should go higher up into philanthropies too, Because, I mean, if you think about
Mhm.
it, like, your program officer a lot of times is saying to you, "Listen, this isn't just me, man. I'm not like the real gatekeeper decision
Exactly.
maker here. Just don't give me a hard time." Because it's like, and I'm like, "No, you're the one they sent, so I'm gonna give you a hard time. And maybe we could work it out together." But I think the problem there, number one, is that it's the same to me as every other issue, the pipeline issue. Where are we getting our teachers from? Where are we getting our community workers from? But also in philanthropy, where are we getting our people from who work in philanthropy? Lots of folks get lots of consultants who tell them, we've figured it out for this population or that population. All you have to do is deploy your money and go there and make it happen. And then, philanthropists have developed two tracks of existing. One, they have already figured out what you need to do and what you are, but they've also developed a language that makes them feel like we're in partnership and we're doing this together, and we're with you and blah blah blah, and it's an
Yeah.
interchange.
Yeah, and it can't be pejorative. Like, I don't consider myself the expert in anything, and I
Hmm.
believe that that language reveals intention. And
Mm.
so
Hmm. Hmm.
I would never speak about the work that I get to do as a grant maker as me having performed
Hmm.
any impact on any individual organization. I will
Hmm.
say I've accelerated impact. We've partnered on X thing, but
Hmm.
I cannot absorb credit for that because I don't do the hard work. I work and I strain myself. I'm not going to downplay my role,
Hmm.
but it pales in comparison to who is actually performing impact.
Do you wish that some of us had a class as grantees that helped us be I don't want to say better, but not all of us get a class on how to present the best concept paper, how to do the best kind of budget,
Mm.
and how to write the best. And then we see other people kind of like feel like they just march right on in and they know what they're doing and everything. Do you wish that some, especially people of color, that some of us had more support in knowing how to be a good grantee or a good requester?
So it's funny that you mention this because I do think that I I do not think that it is for lack of professional development resources existing. And I also do not think that that gap comes from a lack of willingness or desire to perform, communicate, design at a particular level. I think there is a gap in who has access in terms of what financial grant resources are available to support the professional development of our executives. Because, and I try to also be very intentional there to call them executives. They are leaders of organizations and institutions that are serious, and I don't ever want to diminish that reality. Um, and so I think about organizations like Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, led by Storm Gray, and how that provides accessible professional development resources to leaders, or even in Philadelphia. And I know that these types of supportive resources are typically more place based and homegrown, but thinking about in Philadelphia, we have the Black nonprofit chief executives of Philadelphia, run by Kelly Woodland, which does functionally provide a curriculum that you're describing. So, saying what are those common gaps, those areas of support that executives need to thrive and manage their organizations well without compromising on mission and values.
We need to
Because
we need to be in
oftentimes,
touch with Kelly. We need to be in touch
yes,
with Kelly.
Kelly is doing some phenomenal
Yeah.
programming, and I appreciate that it was an organic it was an organic coming together
Mhm,
during the
mhm,
pandemic, where executives came together and kind of set the agenda on their terms.
mhm.
And it's like one of the most thriving examples of a community of practice that I've seen as of late that is that intentional about sewing into Black executives.
That's amazing. I I feel like I think about this all the time just because of the work that I do, being in nonprofit work, having to like constantly do kind of reports and analysis on what might move us forward, and then having to do the whole philanthropy dance. But here's one of the things that you can help me with that I always worry about just in general. It's not just philanthropy and nonprofits. It's so seeing Salesforce in your, your email handle and knowing that you are there.
Mhm,
I always mention this thing around tech and Silicon Valley and all of these emerging areas that are going to create prosperity and wealth for the nation and for people seem to be like
mhm.
there's a lot of people that are on the first bus when
Okay.
that starts coming, and then it feels like many of us and people of color and communities of color specifically get on the third and the fourth and the fifth bus, if at all.
Yes.
how do
Yes.
how do we solve this? Because there's a new one starting now. AI is everywhere. It's AI. Okay, so what's my community? What's our
Yes.
strategic plan for making sure we're not on the third and the fourth and the fifth bus?
I think that the strategic plan is actually one that is more of a continuum rather than thinking that we're starting a new initiative now. Part of why in the past we've experienced, to your point, getting on the wave late, being that third, fourth round, is because we are oftentimes remediating harm or remediating kind of structural obstacles that would prevent us from even being at the starting line when the game began, if that makes sense. So when we're having a conversation about AI, to make this more concrete, we have to solve for broadband access. We have to ask ourselves, how do we create access to the internet in the homes with the ending of the Affordable Connectivity Program? We have to, really challenge ourselves to not think because we are digital natives of smartphones that automatically translates to digital literacy on computing machines. And I have to solve for basic digital literacy and reliable internet access before I can ever answer the question of how do I meaningfully develop literacy with artificial intelligence. Because if you don't have the hardware and you do not have connectivity, you literally cannot participate. And so that's so why I say it's a continuum is because I think during the pandemic, we began to answer the question of connectivity well. That's how you have the Affordable Connectivity Program. We recognized by virtue of distance learning how deeply critical it was for internet access to be accessible to all. Um, and one of the things that will continue to energize us, I think, is how we keep those lessons top of mind as we turn all of our attention toward either developing AI solutions that will improve or enhance the learning experience, or even developing the skill sets for how one works with existing solutions today. Um, and so that's why it's more of a continuum than a starting point, because we were already having to answer questions around digital skills. How do we integrate that into classrooms? How do we facilitate experiences where students can see those skills applied across a range of career outcomes or career pathways before we even move into, and then how does this new technology upend or accelerate what you originally saw for yourself?
Hmm. So in some ways, it's not just jumping on trains. It's like preparing yourself to be able to be at the starting line when they happen.
Yes,
Huh.
absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely, but it's also really exciting because from my understanding as a mid-millennial who was coding on MySpace and not understanding my software development potential, um, what is different about then
Mhm.
to now is that we are asking the equity question a lot earlier
Mhm.
than we did when I was a teenager learning HTML and CSS to be able to make like GIFs appear all over my
Okay, I
MySpace
just
link.
want to stop for a second. What is MySpace?
MySpace, wait, is this like a legit thing? I love this, Chris. Let's do it.
It's not, but I just feel like for some people, they might hear MySpace and they
Okay,
don't even
so
know what we're
okay,
doing, right?
that's so true. You
You
are
know,
so correct. So MySpace is one of the original
OG.
social networks. I want to say at that point in time, it was like Friendster, Black Planet, and MySpace. Because
Ooh, not Black Planet.
oh yes, that
Yeah.
was the earliest part of my coding journey. If I'm quite honest with you, sign my
Oh,
guest list, okay?
I love
Um,
that.
but yes, so a social network. And what was great about MySpace was that you could do very basic HTML editing to customize the user experience of your profile. So it was basically your own personal website. Think Tumblr,
Hmm.
pre-Tumblr,
Hmm.
and like with way more social anxiety because there was this thing called a top 8 whereby your friends could determine their value in your life by where they ranked in
Mm.
this list. There's music on the page. It was a great time. It was a moment in time.
You know, God, you're just jarring for me my own pathway. So I tell people that I started blogging in the 90s,
Mhm.
in probably like 98, 99, and they kind of go, wow, there was blogging
Oh,
then.
so you're like
So
GeoCities.
I am beyond GeoCities, like I was doing HTML. My first blogging stuff was HTML, and then I found Front Page, Microsoft Front Page at some point, which made it like it wasn't perfect, but it made it easy to develop your own
Mhm.
sites and all that. I didn't know that I was learning anything. I just wanted to put up stuff about Prince and about like
That's how I felt
poetry
about
and stuff
MySpace.
about my so you had a reason to learn it because there was something you
Mhm.
wanted to do with it, right?
Mhm.
So all along, eventually came TypePad and movable type, and which evolved into other platforms. And the more the platforms came out, the more I was like, man, this could be a thing. There's like tools now. There's all these tools that are making it easier. It's democratizing everything. We can start our own kind of everything. Listen, I'm old enough to remember when Twitter used to let you customize the background. You could
Yeah,
have different backgrounds and everything, different colors and stuff going on.
I love
Um,
it.
but I didn't do it because I wanted to be part of an industry. I did it just because it was relevant. And that to me should say something about teaching and learning now today. We could let me tell you a mistake my dad made with me, and I'll tell you, you can tell me if there's a modern application to this. He told me, boy, if you don't do good in math, the whole world's going to be computerized and you're going to fail. You're not going to be able to do anything. So if you fail at math, a math class, you're not good at math, you'll never be good at computers, and computers will never be, I mean, computers are going to be the thing. This is 70s, 80s talk, right?
I love it.
I never was great at math, so I just gave up. I was like saying to myself, "Well, I guess I ain't never gonna be nothing then,"
Meanwhile, you're
So
coding.
meanwhile, right now, I got a phone that does all the math for me, does all the like if I was going to do coding, my application at bringing it up is a few years ago we were telling young people coding was the thing, and I'm hearing people now say that's passe, like that's already bad advice. What's your take?
So I made a gesture of so when you said that coding is passe because I believe that actually the information threshold is higher. So, yes,
Hmm.
generative AI makes coding very accessible, but at least at this stage of artificial intelligence, there's still a level of analysis that anyone who is receiving data back from a large language model, there's still a level of analysis you have to do to make sure that that information is accurate. So, do I believe that we'll get to a state of generative AI where you can trust the responses and you do not have to worry about hallucinations and you do not have to worry about things being out of context? Yes. Do I believe that we are there at this juncture? No. And so, even when we hear conversations, not only around kind of student access, but also what skills are most attractive in the workplace where AI is concerned, we're
Hmm.
hearing about those human skills like critical thinking and analysis because that is we have not refined the models yet enough to
Hmm.
be able to trust 100% of the responses 100% of the time.
So you
Um,
would not give up on the programs that we do where we're putting young people into coding camps and, getting
no,
girls into STEM and all that. You wouldn't stop that.
at least in the acute sense, the
Hmm.
reality is that you will need that basic level knowledge. You still have to know good code in order
Hmm.
to identify good code responses from
Hmm.
generative AI. Is kind of what I'm saying. So in order
Hmm.
to use it well, you kind of have to already have a great foundation in it.
So you being a Philly person,
Yeah.
and you think about this, think
Mhm.
about the Philadelphia public schools. Think about the corporate world that you've seen, the philanthropy world. How should they all be working together to make sure that we have a world of opportunity opening up for young people in school right now? People who are, let's say, eighth grade in high school and college. W- Those specific people, what should we be doing for them right now?
Absolutely. So I think about programs when I think about specific to Philadelphia, the IT apprenticeship program that's run by Shayna Savage, or in New York, the Future Ready NYC programming, and the work that the Technology Employment Council does in New York City, where you are having employers help to create exposure opportunities or even work-based learning experiences where students are pairing kind of what they're learning in academic knowledge with exposure to workplace and seeing where the connectivity between the two lies. I believe any early exposure opportunities that we're able to facilitate for kids relative to any sector, but especially where um, tech career pathways are concerned is like super critical and super important. So that's something that I will point to today. I will also say having creating like career ladders for young people, so helping them understand how certain academic courses develop particular skills that translate into exciting career pathways or the career pathways that interest them most, being able to create connections human to human, right? So how do we facilitate mentorship relationships when possible between employers and individual schools, whether that's managed by way of a counselor, whether that's by way of out of school time programming. So thinking about the Coded by Kids of the world, the Hidden Genius projects of the world, whereby they are bringing together industry and student, or you're doing that in school engagement. Those opportunities and staying close like that can be really powerful. Um, I will say my favorite form of public education at the moment, particularly where high school is concerned, is vocational education, because I think just being able to integrate kind of that co-op or apprentice-based apprenticeship learning model into how young people are able to explore what they might want to do for themselves. I think that's a really powerful opportunity. And I just think the advances that we're seeing in CTE and youth apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship are really exciting.
Do you think there's a role to play, for instance, like for a mayor to develop the relationships between some of these big companies and the school systems?
Absolutely. I think that is a challenge that school systems have to navigate, whereby by and large, the upside for employers, if we're looking at like the scale between the pros and the cons, a lot of employers will see the con being having young people on site, right? Or the liability of what it means to train up or like these overestimations about just the journey from zero to walking that it'll take for helping a young person integrate into the workplace. I think the mayor can create some good pressure and good incentives around it. I think one of the things that is really helpful in the Philadelphia example, for example, would be Mayor Parker convening like business roundtables to say, how do we more closely align what pathways students see for themselves and true employer demand? Because the other danger, too, in saying, let's get all of these parties to the table, is that if employers do not keep up their end of the bargain, there's a lot of harm that can
Mm,
take place
mhm,
in creating a pipeline of talent for opportunity where there's no realized goal on the other side. So you're seeing that a lot in places where, for example, I want to say in Michigan, where there's a lot of momentum around electric vehicles and the advanced manufacturing plants that are supposed to come. But because those plants have yet to open, you have this backlog of talent that have now gone to training organizations, nonprofit organizations. You've developed all of these pre apprenticeship programs, but folks are growing tired and dissatisfied, rightfully so, because that opportunity isn't there. So I think there's gotta actually be some level of policy incentive or some level of political will that's engendered around this to really make it a priority and to create the accountability.
Who you've thought a lot about equity, so who actually holds all of this accountable to some principles around equity? Like when we have something like AI busting out on the scene, and where's the voice come from that says, "Okay, we're at the beginning of this, though. Let's ask some equity questions and make sure that we get it right."
I think wow, this is kind of a chicken and the egg question.
Hmm.
And equity questions typically are,
Hmm.
because on one hand I think the lived experience of equity is that those who stand in the gap of being most harmed or have the potential to be most harmed are those who get it onto the issue agenda, right?
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
those who have been the third or the fourth on the bus are typically the ones saying, hey, we need to make sure we're not last on the bus again. But I think, and this is the promise of this moment, and that's why I compared it even to my own experience in coding as a teenager, is that it feels like we are at least willing to acknowledge that the question needs to be answered on the end of the power structure that like holds the greatest bargaining chips.
Hmm.
So the
Hmm.
fact that, for example, Salesforce has an office of ethical use where AI is concerned, the fact that trust and equity continue to be at the center of how Salesforce develops its AI products, and you hear these conversations and you see philanthropy really flowing to be that risk tolerant innovation capital around what
Hmm.
safeguards do we need. I think the recent AI policy that's come out of Senate begins to ask some of the difficult questions. I'd be curious to see how some of these frameworks in the month to come, particularly where students and educators, and how access to resources will be made available to school districts. I think that's when we'll get to ask some real equity questions, because
Hmm.
we'll see how funding is allocated to districts across the nation to support that. So it's nice to be at the, I guess, general population outset of the technology because we've had it around for ages. But to be at
Hmm.
this stage and to be asking the equity question means that it's more salient. And at least we've learned to ask it sooner than before.
I wonder what the application of AI is going to be to equity, right? Like we're talking about making
You
sure
know,
that it's equitable, but does AI create some tools that like make equity visible?
it's interesting that you mentioned this. So I was just at an AI and the Future of Work Impact Summit at Temple University about 2 weeks ago. And during one of the panels, one of the potential uses of AI where human resources was concerned was a bias detector, which is so interesting because so often the inverse conversation is had around how AI, because of bias in data sets, will then promote bias itself. But folks are proposing AI to actually be the one that detects human bias instead of vice versa. And so it's a very interesting time. I do think that so long as humans stay part of the process, like we are definitely not at the point of general intelligence whereby humans can be completely removed. So long as there's humans as part of the process, and if we are building equitable teams, I think you can design equitable AI solutions or a solution that then promotes equity.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah, one
Mm.
example that I can give quickly would be an organization that works with refugees and immigrants working on AI solutions that help improve the translation of international credentials or the way that someone from a different country might structure their resume such that they are actually making it through some of those filters that filter them out of applicant pools too early because of cultural nuance. So, like, those are
Mm.
some that's an example of AI
Okay, well, listen,
on the
let's make our $1 billion on the spot here. Let's just rapid prototype something, right? So I don't know if
okay.
you remember like monster.com. Do you remember not Monster? Like all
Yes.
the Indeed now, and I don't know what people use as much anymore, but um I think that was started before the time that we knew that certain names don't get callbacks or certain
Exactly.
things that, so is there an AI filter that de-ethnicizes your
Ooh,
and then gives HR people blind copies of de-ethnicized resumes?
wow. This is very forward thinking of you. This is very Black Lady sketch show of
Well, if
you
anybody listens to this
in
and
a
makes
good
$1 billion,
way.
just cut me off some.
In a good way.
Yeah.
I think something that I'd love is to remove, because this is like a more tricky one, is to like I would say like homogenizing your institution,
Hmm.
right? Like if you
Hmm.
got a degree, you got a degree. Like let's
Hmm.
level this playing field. It's hard
Hmm.
enough to pursue higher education here.
Hmm.
And like also homogenizing your extracurriculars. Because I've also seen where folks are leveraging experience in lieu of degrees because it's not a particular caliber of experience, right? Because it wasn't an
Hmm.
internship at a big five law firm, and it was interning at my local CBO. They are somehow uneven, but like I was copying papers at both,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm. Hmm.
so I'd love AI that like somehow levels or balances and homogenizes those things because those are also tells that allow people to get out of the conversation too.
It's funny how the human algorithm works on those things right now in the negative for us, right?
Right.
That's what we call systemic discrimination that people are starting to say doesn't exist, but that's only because they don't want you to find it and don't want you to detect it because they like the benefits of it. But without AI, the human algorithm across many HR departments and many companies and even many universities and schools actually already does the job in the inequitable direction, right? Like you
Mhm.
don't need AI for that. You might need AI though to help us get rid of that. I'll give you like kind of a quick example. This isn't, the best example, but I was in staffing for a while. So I got to see kind of like on a daily basis what it took for me to get candidates through the door and what it took for me to
Mhm.
find candidates, all that. And that, like we talked about philanthropy, staffing is its own issue. It's such a different
Oh,
show. We
try
could do a
being
whole
a workforce development grant maker. So, like, I'm seeing it on both sides.
I worked in workforce development too. So, and these are all like, first of all, workforce development, super important. We need to be talking more about it just in general. We just need to be talking
Mhm,
because this is a lot of this conversation we're having right now is only so that we clear cut pathways for young people right now to get to places that they're not getting already, like get to
mhm.
jobs they're not having, and to stop having this conversation around why can't we find any diversity in such and such a pipeline. Well, I mean, that feels like the silliest question to be asking for 50 years. Figure it out. Like it isn't exactly rocket science. Pay me some money. I'll go find people for you, you know.
Absolutely. And I'll give you one of my hot takes because it actually came to exist because of the AI talent conversation, to be honest. And that is, everyone is talking about how do we find the machine learning engineers of today? How do we find those who can write the data sets such that they are inclusive and equitable? And to answer a talent problem of today, you would have had to design the solution 20 years ago when they were in elementary school, because there are certain choices that have to happen in elementary school to make them eligible for certain middle schools. And there again, you have to make certain choices in middle school to have access to certain high schools and certain experiences in high school. So there's this kind of retrospective. Any talent problem is an education problem of yesterday.
Wow. Wow. That's not just a hot take, that's also depressing a little bit. I
But
mean,
it's not
wow.
depressing if
Yeah.
we're having conversations about what skills do we support and emphasize today? How do we create access today in young people? I
Yeah.
think the beauty of I think the beauty of our evolution towards a more lifelong learning culture is that there are interventions and solutions being designed at every phase of life to support folks on that journey.
Mm, mhm,
I think we've just
mhm.
got to take the slice of the pie that we feel most called to and can commit ourselves to most sustainably. And so, if
Yeah.
our slice of the pie is early exposure, is early engagement, then we are answering the questions of 20 years from now today. So, it's not
Mm.
pessimistic at all.
I feel like there's a book in you about this.
You know, maybe.
You know why I say? Because you just said a word, every phase of life, a phrase. Just said that, and it hit me that that's exactly what I'm thinking of. Is what should we be doing for young people at each phase? What should we be doing for kindergartners right now? What should we be doing for eighth graders? What should we be doing for graduating high school seniors? And what we should be doing for kids that are in the middle of college right now and are going to hit the job market 2 years from now? Those are
Mhm.
different stages of life, and there could be a discrete thing to say to each of them, like, right, at each of those levels. I'm really concerned about the ones that are in the middle of college right now, if they're in college, in the middle of it, because that's kinda your last, I think, chance to do the final prep, like, with them.
Yeah.
Make good decisions, and let's help you.
Absolutely. And I think middle of college is a great placeholder for what it just means to be making decisions for yourself for the first time.
Mm,
Because whether you're
mhm,
at a legacy institution or not, there's some pretty consequential decisions and formative experiences that you're having just
mhm,
by virtue of life itself. That you're right. Like, supportive structures are really needed. And if you are not coming from an upper middle class and beyond kind of quintessential Americana background, you're going to need support of some kind.
mm, mhm, mhm,
And I think what supports are needed vary by audience. And that's where the equity piece comes in, is not that everybody gets the same resource, but that folks have what they need. Um, but it doesn't negate the fact that everybody needs help.
That's
We're all just
another, another equity application for AI is basically to say, Let me punch in the type of person or kid or background or wherever, and it will spit out a plan that basically says, well, for this population, for this person, here's the best plan of support. Here's the areas you should concentrate and focus on most, so that way you can have a different IEP, individual education plan for every
Right.
person, for everybody, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about, so at work, we have like work plans and like professional development plans, right? So why do we think that it's like literally okay only in this context?
That's right.
It's weird. It's like we get report cards and like that's totally fine, but then we think that that's just supposed to drop off at some particular point in time.
Um, so as we come to an end, I do want to throw two questions at you, like that are the same question, really. It's just the flip side. Like, what are
Okay.
you most hopeful about when you
Okay.
think about AI and where we're going and access to jobs and roles and positions in high places? And then what do you find most concerning? The thing that you think we should focus on intently right now?
I am hopeful about the opportunity we have to change our relationship to institutions like school and work with AI. With the time efficiencies that we can realize with our technology, which seems to be what excites folks the most, who do we get to be? How much more human do we have the capacity to live our lives as when we are spending less time doing the things that we feel we need to participate in society. So that is what I'm most hopeful for, the
Hmm.
opportunity to be more human. What is most concerning, or what I have my eye on the most, would be what potential inequalities that we do not contend with today that will emerge as a consequence of those efficiencies.
Hmm.
So I think that it is not just as simple as reskilling, upskilling. I think even in terms of the human experience and how we connect to each other socially, we will need to be super intentional the more digitized our lives become. So
Mm-hmm.
those are my watch outs. And I have that as the mom of a 7-year old. I see and have to be very intentional about what I like to call his 3D
what's
experiences.
what's that?
Exact 3D
Yeah.
experiences, like
Yeah.
being out in the real world,
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
touching grass, as they
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
So just being more intentional about that, and you know, understanding just how pervasive it can be and how easy it can be to take the lived experience for granted. So that's my hope and my concern.
I hope that we have way more people like you demystifying places where things are mysterious for us. We can't all be at every level and we can't see everything. So it's nice when we have people that are basically opportunity whistleblowers who basically say, I'm on the inside, I'm looking at this, and let me give you a little bit of breakdown, some analysis. Because I feel like I wish I had better counseling when I was younger. But the counseling that I did get that was the best for me was from people informally, like you, saying two or three things to me at a time, in a way that I understood that actually still makes me money today. Right? Like, not something I learned in school, just something somebody said to me who was in the know somehow, was in a position. They were in a position to tell me something I could believe. And today I'm making money on some of the things that people said to me back then that I didn't get in school. Wasn't even a school thing. It was like opportunity whistleblowers. Young brother, you need to X. You need to Y. Maybe you should think about, oh, have you ever thought about, oh, let me put something in your hand and have you go read this and let me know what you think. Man, that's worth so much. So you, super valuable to all of us, just so you
Oh,
know.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I
Appreciate it.
appreciate it.
Now, when you write the book, come back. Come back
Of
with the book.
course.
All right.
Of course. This was fun.